The following pre-recorded political program is sponsored by TV for Goldwater Miller on behalf of Barry Goldwater, Republican candidate for President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, we take pride in presenting a thoughtful address by Ronald Reagan. Mr. Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. We will keep in mind and remember that Barry Goldwater has faith in us. He has faith that you and I have the ability and the dignity and the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Ed Driscoll. Welcome to Silicon Graffiti. At the 1936 Democratic National Convention, Franklin Roosevelt said,
"To some generations, much is given. Of other generations, much is expected. This generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny."
Ronald Reagan began his political career as an FDR supporter. Beginning in the early 1960s, he took to using FDR's iconic phrase in many of his most important speeches. But these days, it's looking like the next few years, heck, maybe even a big chunk of the next decade, could very well be a rendezvous with scarcity. It began innocently enough a few years ago, with left-wing elites using global warming as a wedge to discourage middle-class consumption. In late 2007, General Electric, which makes a good chunk of its money selling light bulbs, aired a sports broadcast on its flagship television network that encouraged viewers not to consume one of General Electric's chief products.
Okay, back in New York, and once again, as part of NBC Universal's Green is Universal initiative, we have turned out the lights in the studio to kick off a week that will include more than 150 hours of programming designed to raise awareness about environmental issues.
At the end of the following year, General Electric was reporting a 46% drop in its fourth quarter earnings. Good news, GE! Consumers obviously took their television network's advice to heart. Another piece of advice from GE that consumers certainly took to heart was electing the candidate that GE's TV division backed. He was offering a remarkably similar message to the one that Bob Costas proffered to his viewers.
We can't drive our SUVs and, eat as much as we want and keep our homes on, 72 degrees at all times.
And only a few months earlier, the spouse of his chief rival on the Democrats' primary election circuit told viewers,
"We just have to slow down our economy and cut back our greenhouse gas emissions because we got to save the planet for our grandchildren."
Well, mission accomplished, old sport. The first sector to really feel the crunch was banking, an industry crippled by mortgage foreclosures caused by such onerous top-down legislation as the Democrats' Community Reinvestment Act. And a lot of that bad debt is still on the books and making banks awfully skittish about loaning new money, as Nicole Gelinas told PJTV's Joe Hicks in late January.
People don't want to borrow at all because they still know that they're struggling to pay down the debt that they already have. And the banks that are still in existence, which is not all of them, they don't want to lend to anybody else because they've still got to take all of these losses left over from these crazy years.
And with multiple sectors of the economy impacted by the ongoing rhetoric and the laws imposed by the left, and the economy now sufficiently slowed, it's time for government to offer the appearance of building things back up. It's time for a New Deal. But the first calls for the New Deal actually preceded our current economic woes. In May of 2008, the same month that Obama was telling voters that we can't drive our SUVs and keep our homes on 72 degrees, the Dow Jones Industrial Average stood at over 12,000 points. May of 2008 was the same month that Paul Kanjorski, the Democratic congressman from Pennsylvania, said, quote, "All we're doing is going into the basket and saying, damn, what did they do in 32? What did they do in 34? What did they do in 36? And we're pulling them out, dusting them off, and giving them a paint job, correcting the fenders a bit, and we're using them." Kanjorski added, quote, "To get us through the horrendous problems we may have over the next several years, We've got to make these old programs work, and we've got to be as inventive as hell, unquote. If Congressman Kanjorski's name doesn't immediately ring a bell, you may remember him from this classic Kinsleyan gaffe from August of 2007.
We really, in this last election, when I say we, the Democrats, I think pushed it as far as we can to the envelope. We didn't say it, but we implied that if we won the congressional elections, we could stop the rule. Now, anybody who was a good student of government, that wasn't true. But, you know, the temptation to want to win back the Congress, we sort of stretched the pack.
Of course, as is increasingly understood, the original New Deal was not an organized plan to end the Depression, but wild experimentation for its own sake by FDR and his cabinet. And as UCLA noted in 2004, it prolonged the Depression by 7 years. And the rendezvous with destiny that FDR promised voters in 1936 ended up being World War II. The stimulus package ultimately needed to jumpstart the economy. But today, even as President Obama with one hand promises to work like a laser to revitalize the economy,
My bottom line is to make sure that we are saving or creating 4 million jobs. We are making sure that the financial system is working again, that homeowners are getting some relief.
he introduces legislation designed to slow it down. During much of 2008, even while the Dow Jones was healthy, gasoline prices were soaring. They declined rapidly beginning in the late summer of 2008, when then President Bush rescinded the federal moratorium on offshore drilling. By early December of 2008, gasoline prices were well under $2 a gallon, even in California with its high gas taxes. But Tom Brokaw begged then President-elect Obama to bump them back up.
Let's talk for a moment about consumer responsibility when it comes to the auto industry. As soon as gas prices began to drop, consumers moved back to the larger cars once again, to SUVs and the big gas consumers. Right. Why not take this opportunity to put a tax on gasoline, bump it back up to $4 a gallon, where people were prepared to pay for that, and use that revenue for alternative energy and as a signal to the consumers, those days are gone. We're not going to have gasoline that you can just fill up your tank for $20 anymore.
And also in December of 2008, the Washington Post and the New York Times concurred with Brokaw's suggestion, making it a trifecta of Northeast Corridor establishment liberalism, begging the office of the president-elect to stick it to the common man. Would Obama be averse to such proposals? An answer to a similar question about high gas prices back in June provides a hint.
So could these high prices help us?
I think that I would have preferred a gradual adjustment.
And sure enough, on February 10th, the San Francisco Chronicle reported, President Obama is shelving a plan announced in the final days of the Bush presidency to open much of the U.S. coast to oil and gas drilling, including 130 million acres off California's shores from Mendocino to San Diego. Interior Secretary Ken Salazar put the plan on hold Tuesday while his agency conducts a 180-day review. But Salazar's critical comments about the proposal made clear that the new administration will rewrite it, if not completely scrap it, unquote. Now, speaking of California, a state hit with 9% unemployment and mammoth fiscal shortfalls, seems determined to do everything it can to avoid growing its way out of the problem. California residents like myself are constantly exposed to headlines such as these. And of course, one sector of the media, long thought obsolete, brilliantly reorganized itself in the late 1980s and 90s. Many thought AM radio was a monophonic dinosaur with the rise of stereo FM radio in the 1960s. Then came the first successful national political talk radio show, and a medium that dates back to the 1920s was reborn as a haven for political talkers. Naturally, such success must be punished.
There you go. We've got to get the fairness doctrine back in law again.
All right. Well, good for you. You know, we got to work on that.
The American economy is remarkably resilient. It survived the Depression in FDR's 1930s, and it survived double-digit inflation, unemployment, and interest rates in the last years of Jimmy Carter's 1970s. But there's only so much abuse and top-down control it can take before it reaches overload. You and I have a rendezvous with scarcity. A destiny that for some is already here, and for the rest of us may be arriving all too soon, because a surprisingly wide swatch of the nation's elite wants just that. Speaking for the rest of us, for Silicon Graffiti, I'm Ed Driscoll.